parallels to the symbolism of the blue degrees, the weapons and blows of the assassins, extracted from the 26th degree, Prince of Mercy, in the inner sanctuary, Pot 4, the book of the holy house. And immediately, while he yet spake, cometh Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves, from the chief priests, and the scribes, and the elders. And they laid their hands on him, and took him. They cried, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate said unto them the third time, Why, what evil hath he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him, and let him go. And they were instant, with loud voices, requiring that he might be crucified. And the voices of them and of the chief priests prevailed. This ignorant people, aroused and maddened by artful and unprincipled leaders, and thirsting for blood, so that they clamoured for the release of Barabbas, a notorious felon, and for the blood of Jesus of Nazareth, was represented by the first assassin, striking Curum upon the throat, at the south gate, with the rule of iron, symbol of the brutal instincts of the mob. And the chief priests and all the council sought for witness against Jesus, to put him to death, and they all condemned him to be guilty of death. And the chief priests moved the people that Pilate should rather release Barabbas unto them, and the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. These malignant priests, moved by envy, and instinctively dreading the light of reason and the simple teachings of morality, inciting the ignorant and fickle populace to demand the execution of their friend and benefactor, were aptly typified by the second assassin, striking Curum upon the breast at the west gate, with the square of steel, symbol of a bloody and remorseless fanaticism in the herd, whose dead level of brutal ignorance is typified by the square, a fanaticism that paralyzes all the generous and noble aspirations of the heart, and makes ignorance as cruel as fear is. And so Pilate, willing to content the people, released Barabbas unto them, and delivered Jesus, when he had scourged him, to be crucified. And the soldiers of the governor plaited a crown of thorns, and put it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they spit upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they led him away to crucify him. And when they had crucified him, they potted his garments, casting lots upon them, what every man should take. This Roman despotism, cold and heartless, and maintaining itself by indulging the cruel humours of the mob and the crafty malignity of the priesthood, was well typified by the third and chief assassin, striking Curum the master upon the temples at the east gate with the mallet, symbol of the unity and blind force of the military power by which all despotisms are maintained. It is the mace or hammer of steel of the mailed, butchers of the Middle Ages, with which heretics were brained, extracted from Albert Pike. Conclusion, in the inner sanctuary, Pot I, the book of the Lodge of Perfection. In the following extract, Pike quoted from the writings of an unnamed adept, Eliphas Levi, which he followed with his own comments set within parentheses, see also Appendix 3. Although Pike's views on the nature of the Masonic symbols grew to differ substantially from those below, they will be seen as an early source of inspiration from which Pike was able to develop his own ideas. When Solomon caused the temple to be builded, he entrusted his plans to an architect named Hiram or Haram, Hebrew Mem, Hebrew Resh, Hebrew Yod, Hebrew He, or Hebrew Mem, Hebrew Resh, Hebrew Vav, Hebrew He, Karam or Karam, Ka meaning the sun and light, as in Horori or Horus, the master of life of the lodge, forming the mysterious triad with the sun and moon, or Osiris and Isis. Horus also is Hermes, the Mercury of the Greeks, and symbolized by the blazing star or planet Mercury, clad in blue and gold. This architect, to establish order in the work, divided the labourers according to their skill and experience, and as their number was great, in order to be able to recognize them, whether to employ them according to their capacity or to remunerate them according to their work, he gave each class, to the apprentices, fellows, and masters, particular passwords and signs, 3 fellow crafts decide to usurp the rank of masters without being entitled to it by their deserts, lay in wait at the 3 principal gates of the temple, and when Hiram was about to go forth, one of them demanded of him the master's word, menacing him with his rule. Hiram replied to him, "I did not so receive the word that you demand of me." The enraged fellow craft struck Hiram with his rule of iron, and inflicted on him the first wound. Hiram fled to another gate, and there found the second fellow craft. The same demand was made and the same reply given, and this time Hiram was struck with a square, or as others say, with a lever. At the third gate was the third assassin, who finished the master with a blow of a mallet. The 3 fellow crafts afterward hid the body under a pile of rubbish, and planted on this improvised grave a branch of acacia, and then fled, like Cain after the murder of Abel. Meanwhile Solomon, his architect not returning, sent 9 masters to seek him. The branch of acacia led them to find the body. They drew it from the rubbish, and as it had remained there for some days, they cried, upon raising it, Mokbenak, which means the flesh parts from the bones. The last duties were performed to Hiram, and 27 masters were then sent by Solomon to search for the murderers. The first was surprised in a cave. A lamp burned near him, and a rivulet ran at his feet. A poniard was near him for his defence. The master who entered the cavern recognized the assassin, seized the poniard, and stabbed him, saying Nechem, a word that means vengeance. His head was carried to Solomon, who was angered on seeing it, and said to him who had killed the assassin, "Wretch, did you not know that I had reserved to myself the right to punish?" Then all the masters prostrated themselves, and begged for pardon for him whom his zeal had carried too far. The second murderer was betrayed by a man who had given him refuge. He was hidden in a grotto among the rocks, near a burning bush, over which glowed a rainbow, and a dog watched near him. The masters eluded the vigilance of the dog, seized the criminal, bound him, and led him to Jerusalem, where he was put to death. The third assassin was killed by a lion, which it was necessary to conquer in order to gain possession of the body. But other versions say that the assassin defended himself against the masters with an axe, until they succeeded in disarming him, when they took him to Solomon, who ordered him executed. To expiate his crime, such is the first legend. See now the explanation of it. Solomon is the personification of knowledge and the supreme wisdom, Hebrew He, Hebrew Mem, Hebrew Kaf, Hebrew Het Kokma, the second Kabbalistic Sephirah. The temple is the realization and figure of the Holy Empire, the reign of truth and reason on the earth. Purim is man attaining empire by means of knowledge and sagacity. He governs by justice and order, rewarding everyone according to his works. Every degree of the order has a word which expresses its meaning. There is for Purim only one word, but this is pronounced in 3 different manners. In one manner for apprentices, pronounced by whom it signifies nature, and is explained by toil. In another manner for the fellow crafts, and with them it means thought, explaining itself by study. In another manner for the masters, and in their mouth it signifies truth, a word that is explained by wisdom. This word is that used to designate God, whose true name is ineffable and incommunicable. So there are 3 degrees in the hierarchy, as there are 3 gates to the temple. There are 3 principal rays in the light. There are 3 forces in nature. These forces are figured by the rule, which unites, the lever that raises, and the mallet that consolidates. The rebellion of the brutal instincts against the hierarchical aristocracy of wisdom arms itself in succession with these 3 forces, which it turns aside from the harmony. There are 3 typical rebels: the rebel against nature, the rebel against knowledge, the rebel against truth. These were figured in the hell of the ancients by the 3 heads of Cerberus. They were figured in the Bible by Korah, Dathan, and Abian. In the Masonic legend, they are designated by names that vary according to the rites. The first is called Ubella and Romvel. He strikes the Grand Master with a rule. It is the history of the first man put to death. in the name of the law by human passions. The second is called jubilo or hubhan. He strikes curum with the lever or square. So the popular lever or square of a senseless equality becomes the instrument of tyranny in the hands of the multitude, and wounds yet more severely than the royalty of wisdom and virtue. The third is called jubilum, aberam, achirop, jibs, or gravelot. He slays curum with the mallet, as the brutal instincts do when they attempt to create order in the name of violence and fear by crushing intelligence. The explanations are arbitrary. Ingenuity can manufacture as many such as it pleases. Always, in masonry, a symbol, whether it be a thing or a word, has in itself or connected with it something that to the adept reveals its true meaning. Webb and Cross, and the babblers of their school, have never rightly interpreted a single symbol. Their business has been the more completely to conceal the meaning of all, by leading thinkers and the thoughtless alike away from the truth by false interpretations. Curum, like Horus and Hermes, is the master of life and light. He was selected as the hero because the word that means light is embodied in his name and causes it to be. Identical with Horary, the personification of the sun, and Hermes the Grand Master and instructor and founder of the Hermetic philosophy. Light is, to the alchemists, gold, and to the adepts, truth. Curum personifies moral, political, philosophical, and religious truth. He is the apostle of truth, the tribune of the people, the reformer, the defender of free thought. To know whom his assassins personify, ask by what agencies such men have always disappeared from the earth. Royalty fears the patriot, and, as fear is always cruel, sends him to the scaffold. The priesthood convicts the daring inquirer and philosophical thinker of heresy or contumacy, and professing to abhor the shedding of blood, delivers him to the secular on to be murdered. The people, slave of both the crown and the tiara, as a mob, or embodied as soldiery, executes with brutal violence the savage will of both. The rule, regular, from rego, govern, whence rex, or a king, or one who rules, is an evident and apt symbol of royalty, tyranny or despotism. The square, in Latin norma, which also means a rule of conduct and a law, is a natural symbol of the pontifical and sacerdotal power, for the true meaning of a symbol is seldom upon the surface. If it always were, the purposes of symbolism, to conceal, would not be answered. The square is 1/4 of the Passion Cross, and the Latin word norma is the equivalent of the Greek word kapal for nu omega nu, canon, a straight rod or rule, the measuring rule of the carpenter, and therefore a rule of law. The canon law is the law of the Romish Church, and consists of the ordinances of the councils and decretals and bulls of the popes. And the Church claims the right to define and enact what all men shall believe. The opinion of the Pope is infallible as measurement by the square, and the law of the Church as rigorous as the mathematics. The mace, a club of steel, was a common weapon in the Middle Ages, carried at the saddle bow of the knights who upheld thrones and the papacy, and of mailed bishops who rode down heretics. It and its representative, the maul or mallet, are therefore apt symbols of that brute force of the soldiery that has in all ages been the ready and efficient instrument of tyranny. Royalty, the first assassin, smites with the rule of iron at the throat, making freedom of speech to be treason, silencing discussion, strangling the press, and forbidding its subjects to complain of their miseries or lament their dead. The crown itself is but a symbol, and royalty is but the most common type of tyranny. The kings of the mob are despots also, and free states, like Athens or Sparta, subjugating other free states, and animated by a vindictive revenge, strike with the rule at the throat, their anger and hatred taking the form of law, and prohibiting the discussion of human or constitutional rights. When, among republics, force decides erroneously, as it always does, it becomes a crime, sometimes called treason, to be the advocate and defender of the truth. or even to restate the facts of history, the pontificate, the second assassin, in all ages the energetic ally of despotism, smites with the angle of the square of steel at the heart of the victim. At that angle, the spiritual and temporal powers of the papacy unite. The heart was of old the supposed seat of convictions, of faith, and of the conscience, and the priesthood, equally the foe of heresy and true liberty, makes thought and opinions crimes. The mitre and tiara also are but symbols, and the pontificate but the most usual mode in which spiritual despotism manifests itself. Everywhere, and in every age, the priest covets temporal power, and in republics the pulpit becomes the tribune, and the dogmas and cruel angers of the mountain of Jacobism to become a part of the religion of Christ. The sanctuary goes back to the days of Moses and Joshua for its precedents, and the creed persecuted yesterday becomes the persecutor of today. The blind brute force of the mob and the military, which crucified Jesus and set free Barabbas, the malefactor, strikes with the mace at the forehead, the seat of reason and the intellect, as well as of the will. These have, in all ages, been found powerless, as they are, to oppose a military despotism or organized anarchy, in which alike the base and the brutal govern, and the good and the wise serve. The revolutionary tribunal, the Star Chamber, the military commission, tribunals that sit sworn to condemn, and girded with bayonets, are the embodiments of this brute force, and strike with its club of steel at the brain of constitutional freedom. It is the people that clamours for the blood of the patriot, and the soldiery is but the mob, organised and directed by a single will, an instrument wielded like the mace, blind and unreasoning as fate. In the hand of Cyril it smites Hypatia, the virgin enamoured of the old philosophy. In that of Marat it tears asunder the white limbs of the Princess Lambol, and offers the last indignities to her palpitating flesh. It howls after Rienzi as he treads the road that lead to the scaffold. It digs the bones of Cromwell at the will of an English monarch, who becomes a pensioner of the throne of France. It followed Christ with execrations as he staggered under the crushing weight of the cross. It landed Jeffreys when he murdered under the forms of English justice. It slaughtered the Grand Pensionary de Witt. It yelled for the blood of Vergniaud, and would, if he had been unsuccessful, have hounded Washington to the scaffold as a traitor. It betrays and abandons its chiefs, and does not, like Iscariot, repent, but obtains absolution for its own sins by assenting to the sacrifice of those whom it forced into rebellion against the throne or the voluntary union of states. There will always be the scapegoat devoted to Azazel, a sacrifice to expiate the sins of the multitude, and God permits the people to be base in order to demonstrate the legitimacy of the despotisms of the Caesars, the Cromwells, and the Napoleons. The branch of acacia on the grave of Curum is like the cross upon our altars. It is the sign of knowledge surviving knowledge, the green branch that announces another spring. The acacia, or as it is to be read, akakia, in the Greek letter 1 F00 kappa alpha kappa iota alpha, from letter 1 F00 kappa eta, a point, is that genus of trees to which belong that which yields the gum arabic, the mesquite, and the locust. It is the sata or satum wood of the Hebrew writings, sata satum, used in the construction of the tabernacle and the temple, and therefore a symbol of holiness and divine truth. In the Greek, letter 1 F00 kappa alpha kappa omicron sigma and letter 1 F00 kappa alpha kappa iota alpha mean freedom from evil, Hebrew shin, Hebrew dalet, Hebrew kuf, holy, holiness, the temple, or holy house. It is, therefore, not a symbol of immortality alone, but of that life of innocence and purity for which the faithful hope, when the power of the Saviour and Redeemer shall have raised them up to a new and spiritual existence. But what if there should be other and profounder meanings than these, dangerous if known to the multitude, and only darkly hinted at by the adepts? What if Charon, symbol of the light and representative of the sun, and himself typified at his summer and winter solstices by Saint John the Baptist and Saint John the Evangelist, were also the symbol of that divine and perfect truth that dazzles the yes of all except the eagles and the hawks, which in ancient Egypt were sacred to Athon, Ammon, and Mens, the great gods. This divine and perfect truth, known only to the hierophants and the sages, and of which Herodotus, Hermes, and Plutarch speak in enigmas and by obscure hints, has often died and risen again from the dead. Wounded unto death by that literal interpretation of the holy writings that has been for fruitful of narrow and short-sighted creeds, it lived again and became immortal for the initiates, when the Christ raised it, as he did Lazarus, its personification, from the tomb. The rule and the square are apt symbols of the regularity and stiff precision of that interpretation which makes a figurative Oriental book to have been written, as it were, in Geneva, or by an unimaginative Puritan or Presbyterian. The letter killeth, but the spirit vivifies. The rule and square of a stunted and pedantic verbal interpretation wounded this divine truth unto death. And at last orthodoxy always resorts to the mace or mallet of force with which the priest slaughtered the sacrificial victim at the bloody altar which Israel borrowed from the worshippers of Baal and of Moloch, and whose horns dripping with gore revealed its origin. Thus read the sacred oracles of all nations, intelligible to the sages, are fruitful of idolatries among the vulgar. All the mythologies are but allegories accepted as the recitals of facts. The truth hidden under the veil of the symbol remaining invisible within the Holy of Holies, where the visible present dwells for the true initiate between the cherubim. When men have so troubled the order of nature as the slayers of Hiram did, Providence intervenes to re-establish it. As Solomon, symbol of the infinite and creative wisdom, did to avenge the death of Hiram, he who assassinated with the rule dies by the poniard, Caesar falls, pierced by the dagger of Brutus. The tyrant is deemed the enemy of the human race, and the Neros, Caligulas, Domitians, and Robespierres, like the Tarquins and the Appii, are wild beasts whom it seems lawful to slay by any means whatsoever. He who struck with the lever or the square will die under the axe of the law. This is the eternal sentence of the regicides. For the regicides are not those who try and condemn the faithless or feeble king, the Charles or the Louis, but those who assassinate the kings of thought, the royalty of the intellect. Justice is slow, but it at length overtakes the persecuting church, arraigns it before the great tribunal of the nations, and smites it with the axe of justice. Wherever it may have usurped the prerogative of God, the blood of the Huguenot, the Covenanter, and the Quaker, the Sicilian Vespers, and the Eve of St. Bartholomew are always avenged at last by the justice of the Omnipotent. He who completed the murder with the mallet falls a victim to the force which he abused, and is strangled by the lion. The assassin by the rule is denounced by the very lamp that gave him light, and the spring at which he drinks. That is to say, he is subjected to the lex talionis. The assassin by the square will be surprised when his vigilance is at fault, like a dog asleep, and he will be betrayed by his accomplices, for anarchy is the mother of treason. Tyranny is dethroned by the intellect of which it constitutes itself the patron, and by the burghers and the commons to whom it grants privileges, that they may be bribed to sustain it with moneys, and aid it in crushing the nobles that endanger the power of the crown, and the enemies of the church. Its Luthers and Wesleys always spring from its own loins. Its own children turn upon it and rend it. It was the monk of Einsleben that wounded the Romish church unto death. And the Church of England has been, like Protestantism in Germany and New England, the nursing mother of her deadliest foes. The lion that devours the assassin by the mallet is one of the forms of the Sphinx of Oedipus, and whosoever shall have conquered the lion will deserve to succeed to the dignity of Hiram. The body of Hiram, putrefied, shows that the forms change, but the spirit remains. Extracted from Albert Pike, 28 degrees, Night of the Sun, or Prince Adept, Morals and Dogma 1871. The three murderers of Coram symbolize Pontius Pilate, Caiaphas the high priest, and Judas Iscariot, and the three blows given him are the betrayal by the lust, the refusal of Roman protection by Pilate, and the condemnation by the high priest. They also symbolize the blow on the ear, the scourging, and the crown of thorns. The 12 fellowcrafts sent in search of the body are the 12 disciples, in doubt whether to believe that the Redeemer would rise from the dead. 4. Extracted from Albert Pike, Legenda I. The Enigma of Hiram, in Legenda of the Lodge of Perfection, Charleston, Washington, D.C. 1888. At the station of the junior warden, Hiram is stricken with the rule, or 24-inch gauge, and the throat. At the station of the senior warden, with the angle of the square over the hot, and at the station of the muster, with the setting maul on the forehead. In the throat of the organs of speech, the hot was for ages spoken of as the seat of the affections, and is so yet, and the forehead is the seat of the intellect. What is meant by the three implements? Evidently they are symbolical. Men intending to extort a secret, or take life if refused, would not arm themselves with rules and small squares. Webb and Cross, and the babblers of their school, who have never rightly interpreted a single symbol, have not attempted to interpret these. Their business has been to more completely obscure the meaning of all the symbols, leading thinkers and thoughtless alike away from the truth by trivial and worthless interpretations, whereby the symbols have lost all value. The clue to the meaning of the first of the three symbols, the rule, is that in the Greek a rule, whether an implement or a rule of conduct or law, is Kappa Alpha Nu Omega Nu canon, and the law of the Church of Rome, derived from various sources, has always been called the canon law. The rule, therefore canon, is an apt symbol of the Church, and in connection with the putting to death of Jesus of Nazareth, of the Jewish Church, represented by Annas and Caiaphas the high priests, who most urgently demanded and urged the people to demand crucifixion of Christ before Pilate and Herod, even inciting them, when Pilate desired to release him, to demand the release instead of the thief Barabbas. The Jewish priesthood at Jerusalem desired to silence Christ, being exasperated by his denunciations of their hypocrisy and vices, and therefore the junior warden, with the rule, symbol of the pontifical and sacerdotal power, smote Hiram on the throat, where the organs of speech are. Augustus. Caesar became the absolute tyrant of Rome, not by usurping power, but by uniting in his own person all the great offices of the state, and so investing himself with all the powers of government. Possessed of all civil and judicial power, he also became possessor of all religious power by becoming Pontifex Maximus, and all this accumulation of power his successors inherited. The rigid and bending square of steel, its two arms uniting to form the unyielding unity of the right ankle, is an apt symbol of the imperial power of Rome, union of all civil and all religious power. A hard, harsh, unrelenting, merciless despotism, its laws the edicts of an arbitrary will, and, whether just or unjust, executed without ruth or pity. Wherefore, and because every despotism, jealous, suspicious and cruel, because suspicion and jealousy are cowardly, and always cruel, crushes without mercy or remorse the affections of the heart. Upon mere suspicion sends the husband or father to Siberia, or to hard labour in mines, or to a dungeon for life, consigns to exile, imprisonment, or death. Even the nearest blood relations of the tyrant, lest they should have partisans, and the disaffected should gather around them, and imperil the tyrant's tenure of the throne. The senior warden smites Hiram with the angle of the square over the hot, seat of the affections. The maul or mallet, like the club, a brutal weapon which crushes and defaces the image of God in humanity, is a fit symbol of the mob, blind and unreasoning. beating down and crushing with brute force whatever resists its mud rage or has excited its insane suspicions, utterly without reasoning, and hating cultivation and enlightenment, it looks upon the men of thought, the statesmen and scholars and thinkers, as its enemies, and like Jack Cade, considers knowledge a crime. Wherefore, at the station of the muster, Hiram is stricken with the setting maul upon the forehead, seat of the intellect, and falls stunned and crushed at the feet of the third assassin,